We take a single episode of a science fiction TV series and overanalyze it to within an inch of its life. This is the Fusion Patrol Podcast. Welcome to the discussion. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Fusion Patrol. I'm Eugene.
And I'm Simon.
And tonight, we are looking at the Doomwatch episode, No Room for Error. In an isolation ward, a young woman lies stricken with typhoid. The prognosis is grim. This and several other cases appear to be a new drug-resistant strain of the highly infectious disease. Nothing in the arsenal of wonder drugs has any effect on it. British Associated Pharmaceuticals, or BAP, has a potential new wonder drug, Stelamice, but its approval for use is being held up by the bureaucratic red tape of Doomwatch. By the absolute wildest of coincidences, Quist has just made a job offer to a potential new member of the Doomwatch team, Dr. Faye Chantry. She has excellent qualifications, both as a research scientist and a medical doctor. But she's not sure she can commit to the job for a variety of reasons. Amongst other things, she doesn't want to impede scientific progress, which she perceives Doomwatch may be doing. Quist assures her that it isn't so, but she has other reservations. Quist understands her hesitancies. She is, after all, a woman, and they don't have the same priorities as men, and process decisions differently, emotionally, instead of logically even. He seems to try to convince her that if she works for Doomwatch, there'll be no sex for her. I may be misinterpreting that conversation. Oh, and the wild coincidence I mentioned? Dr. Chantry did her research science at BAP, developing Stelamice. And during her strange conversation with Dr. Quist, the head of BAP, Professor Lewin, calls her in Quist's office and tells her about the typhoid outbreak and that Doomwatch is holding up approval of their wonder drug. See, Dr. Quist, you're impeding scientific progress on life-saving drugs. No, we're not, says Quist. We gave our approving report to the ministry 6 weeks ago. They haven't acted on it. I'll get onto the minister right now and see what's the holdup. Even though she's not yet on the staff, Quist sends Chantry to BAP to get the wheels greased for immediate distribution once he gets it cleared by the minister. Professor Lewin at BAP wants Chantry back in the worst possible way and pulls out all the stops to try to re-recruit her. She's been gone for a few years, having left after an incident involving, and being involved with, another scientist at BAP, Nigel, and things haven't changed. Lewin isn't so sure and asks Nigel to show her around. Wink, wink. Doomwatch's report on Stelamice has some contraindications, but Quist gives his personal recommendation to the hesitant minister that, in a limited capacity, for the purposes of treating this typhoid outbreak only, Stelamice appears safe and effective. Back at BAP, Nigel drops the bombshell to Faye. I'm divorced! There's nothing standing between us now. Come back to me, Faye. Let's go to the pub and talk about it. Stelamice is provisionally approved and treatment begins. Professor Lewin allows Nigel to offer Faye a job, but he says it'll only be for a year or two before she quits. If you two will get married, you'll be together day and night. That won't be good. And then she'll want to stay home and take care of the house and the babies, but it's fine. Unfortunately, one of the typhoid patients who was almost dead is now completely dead after adverse reactions to Stelamice. A couple more patients are showing similar reactions. The hospital administrator stops use of Stelamice just as Nigel's daughter contracts typhoid and is admitted. Doomwatch forms a provisional hypothesis. One of the contraindications was that Stelamice should not be given in prophylactic doses. If those patients who had adverse reactions had previously been treated with small doses of Stelamice, this would be consistent with their symptoms. But since Stelamice wasn't on the market, that wouldn't be possible, right? Unless there was a breach in protocol. Nigel thinks it's utter tommyrot and scoffs at the idea. He convinces Faye to administer Stelamice to his daughter. Ridge tracks it all down to a single school, the school near BAP, and the school Nigel's daughter attends. A test of everything at the school finds nothing, but perhaps the milk furnished to the school had previously been contaminated. That farm had been a feed test farm for Stelamice. At the farm, Ridge finds the smoking gun BAP didn't retrieve and destroy the leftover Stellamicin, and workers at the farm broke protocol and used it as an udder wash for the milking cows, imparting low-level doses to some of the students, including Nigel's daughter, who has had adverse reactions to the drug. Nigel realized that this is the kind of cock-up that kills people, including possibly his own daughter. But worse, it ruins reputations, destroys careers, breaks up relationships. Yes, it seems Nigel has lost it all. But all's well that ends mostly well. There's just one loose end. Will Dr. Faye Chantry join Doomwatch? Quist, it seems, knew about her affair with Nigel from her security check and intentionally sent her to BAP to get all that out of her system because, women. Am I right? But it all looks like Faye might be joining the team. Maybe. The end. Okay, well, Simon, this is the first chance that you and I have had to talk about Doomwatch. Now, I know that
Indeed.
the discussions of Doomwatch on the podcast have been going back like years and years and years. And I know that you had to catch up a little bit to catch up to the episodes at Watch. Do you have any observations about Doomwatch as a whole so far from someone who has just plunked down and watched it up to this point?
Well, I have actually found it strangely compelling. So I having got decent recordings of it to watch, that was the barrier when you were first discussing it for keeping up with those early episodes. Having got those decent recordings to watch, I found myself drawn into it as a kind of 1970s curiosity because it is very much, despite its extraordinary prescience in some of the issues that it's dealing with and their relevance today, it's also, as you and Ben have discussed, it's incredibly kind of its time in terms of its style and its portrayal of certain social aspects of the stories. And so it attracted and repelled at the same time, really, going through that first series of episodes where there were some quite strange elements to the stories, but also they were, and I find the characters quite strange in many ways. I mean, and it's not because I share this bizarre grudge you seem to hold against Mary Shelley, but Quist is this, he's not merely a horrible whiner like Frankenstein. He's actually portrayed, certainly in those early episodes, as being an autocrat who is willing to go to extraordinary lengths to pursue what his own vision is of what is right, and essentially to override the concerns of others or any kind of democratic due processes that ought to be in place. And Ridge is obviously a kind of serial womanizer with apparently no conscience about that whatsoever. And to be honest, I didn't think that Ren was much better in that respect.
No, I mean, he doesn't seem to be on the make like Ridge is constantly, but I mean, he wasn't enlightened.
There are certain attitudes that are on display, and that's where the kind of repulsion comes from, and the curiosity that draws you in are these kind of interesting storylines arising out of potential disasters and how they might play out. What I wasn't quite prepared for was how series 2 really kicks it to the next level, in my opinion. So that first episode is such a shame that the finale from season 1 is missing, because that first episode is very much part 2 to that. But the level of drama from then on, in terms of the kind of the almost kind of heart-wrenching dramatic twists that have been occurring, are absolutely compelling. It really is, I think, first-rate drama in terms of the kind of the way in which it explores the impact that some of these decisions can have on individuals' lives, and because it's kind of dwelled into that area that I guess I particularly enjoy in science fiction, of kind of considering the way in which the individual is impacted by decisions that are made by the state, I guess, for want of a better way of putting it, or the authorities, I guess, is what I'm thinking of. And that when you are talking about exploring science, the consequences of the use of science, the use of technology, I mean, it's really about the technology, I think, then you can't get away from the fact that what we do does impact upon, what we do as individuals does impact upon everyone else. And so the decisions that get made have to be made collectively, but everyone's interests are different, and therefore those collective decisions will have consequences. And so the mechanism of the state will be brought in whenever you get any form of crisis, like an outbreak of a chemical weapon, or indeed an outbreak of typhoid, as we're seeing in this episode here.
One of the things that is interesting to me about that, and we can call it the authorities, the powers that be, whatever it happens to be. I mean, these are decisions being made by people elsewhere. In fact, in the case of this episode with the typhoid, these are in some cases, these are decisions being made by people who are not the authorities of the British people. They're being made by those damned Europeans over there without their regulations and stuff, and sending in their not properly taken care of meats and stuff. So, I mean, these are just events that happen from choices that people have made that you have nothing to do with, and yet it's going to impact your life.
Yes.
That's a compelling narrative. But another thing about it is that, ultimately decisions got to be made, don't they? Right? I mean, somebody has to make some decisions about whether to use Stelamice or not to use Stelamice in a situation, and it can't be a perfect world. So there's always a danger. There's always a danger when you portray something, and I think maybe this is part of my thing against Mary Shelley or that genre of science fiction. It's like, we're going to do something, and it's going to go horribly wrong, and that's why. And the conclusions that people draw from it are usually just like they do off, sound bites on the news. They're not nuanced. They're not complete. They're simplistic, and they draw the wrong black and white conclusion. Science bad. Every time a scientist, they're all amoral, and they all are, godless, and they all don't, they're tampering with God's will, and they're all this, and it's like, oh, that's bad. And it's not that. Well, when they make this decision about Stelamice, it's going to kill some people, and it's a mistake, but it's the right decision. To use that drug is the right decision. Yes,
because there's a philosophical aspect to it. I'm not denying that tendency that there is, and I think it's more about people using things to reinforce their own pre-existing prejudices. True. But in a way, that is why I like science fiction that explores the nuances in this, and I think that is what Doomwatch in this second series is. And thank goodness we do have all these episodes from the second series. That is where it seems to be really keen to explore those things, because you're absolutely right. It's not necessarily a question about something going wrong. It could be a question about something going right. And I think this episode deliberately sets out to explore the way in which something going right, even when it goes right, is still going to have consequences. Nothing is perfect. There will always be problems to fix. And when you are talking about a typhoid outbreak, problems to fix will involve people dying. And it's a question, it does then become a question, which is absolutely, among the age-old philosophical questions. It's easy to answer if you're a utilitarian, but if it means one or two people dying, then does it mean that you allow those people to die in the interests of saving a great many more people?
Yeah, which is I think part of the crux of this episode. As a whole,
and they use it in an excellent way to kind of hang the other dilemma with sort of Nigel as the fulcrum of this, where you kind of have one attitude as a scientist and another attitude as a patient or a family member of a patient, because you may make an entirely different decision if you're if you are personally affected in that way, because what you're talking about, and there are these endless, I mean, it's one of the things I loved about this episode, there is endless, earnest discussions about large-scale trials and data and all the rest of it. And yet, when it comes down to how he should treat his daughter, Nigel isn't being, we'll come back to the sexism undoubtedly, but Nigel isn't being the rational scientist in this. That kind of male equals rational stereotype and it is pointed up in I think something that Faye says about him, which is that a lot of his attitude towards his work is based on faith, and that carries over when it actually becomes a question of life and death for his daughter, because he is making a decision that is very emotional, based on he wants to intervene rather than not intervene, and that's regardless of the fact that he doesn't have the full picture yet. They don't have all of the data. That they're busy trying to find out the data, but for him, it becomes that. It's that emotional thing of, we must do something, and this is something, so it's better than not doing anything at all, even if it wasn't his kind of brainchild, his wonder drug. You can almost imagine that he would just go, well, regardless of what is rationally on a pure question of the probabilities, what is the question of what might have the most likely beneficial outcome here? Just doing something is what he wants to do as the patient's father.
Well, you mentioned his pride as well, because even before his daughter is stricken, he clearly is in the Doomwatch's anti-progress camp. What he does is progress.
Not proper scientists.
That's right. Despite the fact that they are proper scientists. And I'll defend Doomwatch at least on that level. They may not conduct good science all the time, but they are they are proper scientists.
I would criticize them on that basis. I mean, I think I would defend them on the basis that ethics, the ethical dimensions of experimental research, are an integral part of science, and so the kind of criticisms of Frankenstein and the rest of it strike me as simply saying, all the kind of ethical approval that you have to get and all the rest of it is so much red tape. Let the scientists just get on with it because they are progress. And I'm totally at odds with that point of view. I think Mary Shelley had a good point to make, even if I found Frankenstein himself extremely tedious. So I think Doomwatch themselves are genuinely proper scientists, and the people that they go into battle with, although they may be scientists as well, they are often either politicians or, as in they have moved into civil service positions from a scientific background. Some of them are just straight politicians. Some of them are capitalists because they are working for let's say a private pharmaceutical company or whatever, and their concerns have become bound up in the interests of the company, and that, generally speaking, is I mean, I guess there is an ideal of pure science within the academy, but generally speaking, that's not what reality is like. It's actually the case that you may be a scientist, but you will be something else as well. And our guys in Doomwatch, and they have been guys, our guys in Doomwatch are scientists and watchdogs at the same time. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Okay, let me ask this question. I had two questions. I can't think of the other one right at the top of my head, but it'll probably come back to me. But you touched on the campitalism aspect, and looking at BAP. BAP.
I love it. They're called BAP.
Oddly enough, that's a company here in the United States. BAP, British Auto Parts. So, it's giving BAP a plug there. Yeah, it's like I don't have a British Auto anymore, so I don't have to use them. But they've taken a lot of my money.
There goes your chance
years.
of getting some free auto parts for this.
Window cranks for my old TR7. I needed about 40 of those. Anyway, British Leyland, great stuff. Did they do anything wrong? I mean, I was kind of confused at the end of this episode. I tried to work around it a little bit, but it sounded to me like for the vast majority of this, BAP was right on the money with their protocols and their operations and how they conducted their trials. I don't think there was, sometimes we've seen on Doomwatch, we've seen companies that try to skirt things. I didn't get that impression here. I got that BAP did everything right on their part. I wasn't sure whether or not the whole sudden subplot, or not even a subplot, just sort of like, here's how it got to the farm kind of thing, was where it looked like it might not make it into human trials. Therefore, we decided to start doing investigation on animal trials. But then once we found out that it was human trials, we stopped doing that. Again, we solved the problem with humans, and so we brought it back to the human trial. And that this seems to be a leftover from the farm animal trial aspect of it. I wasn't sure whether or not when they closed down that phase, whether a mistake was been made by BAP, whether their protocol wasn't up to standard, or whether Nigel was in some way negligent. I didn't quite get that.
I think here is where we applaud the nuance, because which, as you mentioned, is very important. And you compare this to an episode like Train and D-Train, for example,
yes,
where the George Baker character was very much a kind of two-dimensional cipher for the fat cat rich capitalist, whereas here, we probably just need to set aside the monstrous sexism of Nigel and Professor Lyric and focus on. Well, yes, but I mean, in terms of whether we think this is a well-behaved company, because I think you're right, they did do everything right, and so point one, they have developed Stelamice, which is the only thing that is available to combat this strain of typhoid, which is resistant to all other drugs. So they have produced something that is incredibly socially useful. Point two, when they are faced with the issues around Stelamice in the hospital where these school children are being treated, who are where there is a higher mortality rate and there are these counterindications, they actually take that seriously and they go through everything, apparently with a fine-tooth comb and in conjunction, yes, with Doomwatch, to see if they can find out what the cause is. Mm-hmm. And where I think the nuance comes in is the fact that when Doomwatch are in there and they get this kind of it's not even really a lead, it's more of a kind of loose end, but this loose end about the farm where the experimental trials have been taking place, they pursue it because they want to know where that leads. Whereas those who are working for BAP are much less inclined to follow it. And so you ask the question, is that because they don't particularly want to know where that leads? And in answer to your question of, were they negligent? Were their protocols at fault? The answer, I think, certainly you seem to get from kind of Nigel's reaction to this, is yes, there was negligence on their part because they shouldn't have left that
sample,
unused batch of antibiotics on the farm because it was no longer part of a trial. And also, on the farm, they were culpable because they had used something they shouldn't have used. Mm-hmm. Albeit that on the farm, they didn't realize the consequences of what they're doing. They thought they were just doing something spiffing that was generally, hooray, scientific progress. And albeit that the kind of, in terms of the scale of the transgression of the protocols that was made, it was tiny, tiny, tiny. Mm-hmm. It really would have been very insignificant if it weren't just for this chain of incredibly unfortunate events.
Coincidences. Let's use the word coincidences. An incredible series of coincidences. What I didn't get, I guess what I was, no, it wasn't what I was getting at, but earlier when I mentioned, where did that break down? Was it BAP not retrieving it? Was it the farm not following? I didn't, if they said what it was, maybe the farm was supposed to destroy it.
I think Nigel said something along the lines of it because he has that extraordinary scene where he's setting it up as if Faye is Poirot, who's pointed the finger at he is the killer, and and his kind of reaction is, oh, bravo, well done, by actually exposing me. You've done all this damage, rather than showing any remorse for the fact that if he had done his job properly, and like I say, it's a small thing, but he's more than anyone going to be aware of the consequences. He actually says that if it is his fault because he should have retrieved the antibiotics.
Okay. Did he show more remorse about his career and his reputation than he did about the fact that his daughter could die? Because I kind of got that out of his speech.
I think he didn't indicate any responsibility at all. I mean, there was self-pity for the fact that it would affect his career. There was some self-pity for the fact that his daughter was critically ill. Like you, I'm not sure what order he put those in, which is, a pretty terrible indictment.
Yes, I suppose it is. So, I guess there's a hint here in the title: no room for error.
Yes.
This one wasn't going to be about no room for greed and cutting corners. This was about just the separate point that I thought was interesting, probably because of difference in writers and lack of continuity. Ridge didn't seem remotely disturbed by the chicken batteries in this episode, despite the fact that in the fish episode, battery people, yes, he was absolutely turned off chicken from visiting that environment. And another piece of this puzzle. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, I agree. It may come from different writers, but actually the perspective is similar in the sense that there is this statement made. I think it's the lady at the farm who says, is it Ridge himself? I can't remember, but someone points out that it is the housewife wanting cheap chicken that lead to these consequences.
It's the farm woman,
yeah. So someone states the fact, and she obviously is coming from a perspective of being a big fan of all of this, but nevertheless, it is pointed out to us as the viewers that this is a consequence of the demand, and that is a debate that continues. Certainly, it's been a big thing in the UK for some time, and the whole question about animal welfare and food quality and what people are prepared to pay for food. Because I don't know how it compares to the US, but compared to other European countries, we actually spend a relatively small proportion of our income on food. We don't appear to be willing to spend money on, I don't think it's high welfare, because there are some appalling welfare practices in other countries where they have foie gras and things, but high quality food. And that is the point here about factory farming.
Yeah, and cows and carousels.
The food imports that are supposed to have brought about the initial antibiotic resistance that caused this typhoid strain to be, for something they were unable to treat using
I felt the
antibiotics they previously had.
I felt the seeds of Brexit in that very episode. I've seen this in other shows, British shows in that era, and there is such a disdain for Europe in a lot of British shows. Not just the French.
You're seeing something of the attitude to it, but as in, this is an issue of imports from other European countries. But I'm not sure that it's although the attitude may be a common root, I don't think it leads logically to the consequences that we are dealing with in 2019, because this is 1971. And
you aren't in EU at that point, were you?
No, indeed. And so joining the European Union is actually a way of harmonizing the standards. It's not even the European Union at this point, but
common market.
Yeah. It will lead to the single market some couple of decades later or so, and within the single market, all of these regulations become standardized, and the the British, Margaret Thatcher, architects of the single market, because it allows us to actually control these things for our imports, not just for the stuff that we grow here. So it shifts things away from being purely about protectionism versus having to accept all of these kind of low quality or substandard food products, to saying, actually, you know what, we can do free trade, but we can also ensure that we have proper safety measures in place so that we are not swamped by low quality, low grade or dangerous produce in this country.
Well, you fixed that.
Well,
that's been solved.
But that has again, we're in the Brexit debate. Another point where the kind of the prescience of Doomwatch is so striking is because in the Brexit debate, one of the big kind of the colourful arguments that keeps coming back up, it's a point that is brought up by those who are arguing in favour of Remain within the EU, is that those who want to leave, among the things they say is it gives us freedom to make a free trade agreement with lots of other countries, and those arguing for Remain says yes, and amongst those countries is the US, who are going to insist that we allow them to export to us their chlorine-washed chicken. And it's exactly the same issue all over again. It's all about food safety and food standards, and the fact that for us there will be consequences of the quality of food imports, and that comes straight back to the problem at the very beginning of this episode.
Yeah. So speaking of the prescience of Doomwatch, we've got typhoid here, not MRSA, but I find it incredibly depressing watching this 1971 or 72 episode, and even the people who are doing the writing, which I assume that they did a little bit of research on this, have got a very good command of, the talking points and reasons why these things are going to go wrong with regards to drug resistance bugs, from using antibiotics in cows and in livestock and into our feed process, and the fact that we overuse them and that's going to cause resistance and and that's a problem that we're genuinely having now in places
50 years later.
Yeah, and we knew about it 50 years ago, and they hadn't fixed it.
Well, and no, it wasn't they knew about it 50 years ago. It was that they were making prime time television programs about it 50 years ago.
Yes,
this is popular culture. It wasn't even a niche discussion, and here we are 50 years later.
Mm-hmm. And that is one of the things about it. The prescience of Doomwatch depresses me, because for very few things that they bring up on this show, very few of them have gone away. Right? None of them have been solved, really. Maybe John Ridge's libido has been solved a little bit, but not really.
Well, I'm not sure about that. I was going to say maybe things have improved a little bit in terms of equality legislation for affecting the workplace, but
yeah, but not solved. The problem is clearly
I wouldn't
still
like
there.
to overstate the case, but
yeah,
the fact that yes,
yeah. So I mean that just really gets me. So we're going to obviously have to talk about the sexism in this episode here in a second. So I'm going to, I'll hold it off for a second. Hey, Anthony Ainley, the master.
Yes, the master.
Looking like such a cheerful and nice guy. I mean, he's really kind of a cheerful, considering the situation that he's in.
But isn't that what was so good about Ainley? He's tree mass, and then he shifts to, you couldn't imagine a nicer, a more gentle old man.
But he was an old man. It's kind of the kindly old man. Here he's sort of a young, nice guy. I don't know. It just struck me. It's like, gosh, acting, huh?
Yeah.
And so this starts us on it. Sewage workers. So sanitation officers. Somehow Ridge has to infiltrate sanitation officers, Cockney sanitation officers. And when they discover he's infiltrated them, they beat him up so that he's got a bandage on his eye for the entire episode. Is this that same thing that happened in the Doctor Who episode where Tom Baker whacked his lip and they had to write it into the script? I couldn't find any evidence on this, but I couldn't figure out why they had that scene or that bit with him doing his eye, or why they felt they needed to explain it.
I mean, I don't know. Are there books about Doomwatch that give us the kind of, there's people have written these volumes that give us all the background information on such things as Doctor Who, and
I couldn't find
shows,
it
thankfully,
online anyway.
Is there a volume about Doomwatch?
I don't know about a book. I couldn't find the info online. I did search for it because it stood out so much. It's like, unless it's entirely there just so that Barbara can kiss his boo-boo better, which, just starts the whole train wreck of sexism that is, in some ways, this episode
we
more
move
than
on
others.
From their kind of crass class generalizations straight into the appalling sexism, which, because this is top of my notes, and it was going to be the first thing I talked about because it's so inescapable. And you alluded to a lot of the stuff just going through the synopsis. But one of the things that really I thought was the worst thing about this was the whole story of Faye and Nigel, and the attitude towards the fact that Faye apparently was forced to leave her workplace, and there's no comment on the fact that she was the one who left, not Nigel. And so,
forced? Do you think forced by management or forced by her own personal? I just can't do this anymore. I think it may well have been her decision, but what kind of environment was she working in where she felt she had to make that decision? In other words, she was not supported. She was not. There are all sorts of reasons that you can speculate around how it actually came about that she left, and there are even scenarios where you think, well, maybe these things were discussed, and it was, a case was made. Lewin did his best to support her, but she just decided it was too painful to go in and see Nigel every day, all the rest of it. But the fact of the matter is, no one asks those questions. No one ponders on, no one even bats an eyelid about the fact that what appears to have he's been forced out. And of course, that's not the half of it, because during the discussions that we see during the episode, particularly between Professor Lewin and Nigel, there is just this utterly creepy complicity. Makes your skin crawl. Go on now, she's free. You're free, she's free. Go on. Yeah.
Well, there's that stuff, but also the very worst moment where the professor tells Nigel that it's up to him whether Faye Chantry gets her old job back or not.
Oh yeah, that's true.
And at one point he says to him, your views count for more than hers, And there's no explanation to that, but the clear subtext is because he's the man.
I'm not trying to justify it. Could it be because he's the one that's working there and she isn't?
But why is that? Why is
he working there? Well, I know, but
is it because he's the better scientist?
Different. He's obviously different because I don't. He's talking about doing computer programming. I thought at some point he's talking about the. So I think he's in a different field than she is. Yeah, I mean, so you and I are looking back on 1971, and I'll tell you, I have been watching Perry Mason lately. My dad used to love that show. I never really watched it, but for whatever reason, I've been watching this. This is very old U.S. I don't know if I ever made it across the pond, but incredibly popular show, Perry Mason. Did. And you watch these episodes, and so much of it has to do with divorce through infidelity. That's a big deal. If you can just prove that your spouse was infidelity, you get everything, right? They're ruined, you get everything. And there's an awful lot of, and now that's not so much now, right?
No.
But back then, as everything. And I think that's true in this case. So with Nigel being married, if these two are having an affair, they are potentially facilitating the destruction of a marriage, the company, in a way. And they, it could be, it's like, we have to stand to that. This can't be happening here, because that's litigation that we could be brought in on. This is just not just a, HR issue. This is, I don't know. I don't know if that's true or not, but I mean, it's hard to look back on that time.
Hard to see how they could be litigated against.
It just could be the publicity that it gets involved with, right? If it goes to court,
could be the publicity. Yeah,
I don't know, but trying to look at divorce cases from the eyes of 1971, it's very different.
Oh, sure. But again, it comes back to the question of if it's an issue for them, who is at fault?
The
decision they have to get rid of someone
is obviously at fault. The sexy siren who tempted the man away from his lawfully wedded wife, obviously. That's just clearly written in the stars in 1971. I mean, I think you're right. Why do we get to say that? That is the clear implication of this story, and I think that is the clear zeitgeist of the time. It's wrong. I mean, it's morally and from looking back, but I mean, I'm sure that's exactly what it is. Women are second-class citizens in this world, in the 1971 Doomwatch world. Yeah,
and there are parallels, I think, to be drawn with the way Dr. Robson is treated in Project Sahara by Quist, because the reason at the end that he gives her the push is because she wasn't honest about the relationship. She wasn't honest with him or the computer about the relationship that she was involved with. But again, it was a relationship with a married man, and therefore there were all of the pressures that you describe involved in that. And actually the way she conducted herself was quite clever, and she didn't allow herself to be compromised, even if she was in a position where she could be compromised. But the reason she was in a position where she could have been compromised, and the reason that Quist sees it as a security breach, is precisely because of all of these attitudes and issues that you are describing, which means that, in effect, the women are held to a higher standard. So the kind of transgressions that a man would have to make in order to be fired in the same way are much more serious than those that a woman would.
That is an interesting way to phrase that. I mean, okay, you're right. It is a higher standard. They can do less wrong and get the push, but at the same time, that's definitely not holding them higher than men. That's definitely holding them lower in status.
Yes, it's requiring more of it's requiring more of them to simply achieve the same as a man, which again,
it's wrong.
It's a question of privilege, and it's something that still hasn't gone away. But it's very apparent that it's completely unquestioned in the way these stories are portrayed.
Another thing about Lewin and Nigel's, I mean, there really is that whole kind of, I know you're gone. He doesn't say it. I know you're gone because of Nigel, but I'm not going to tell you this, but I know a secret. Nigel's divorced now, so you guys just go at it. I think that's that's great. And I like, wow, talk about removing agency from her, right? I mean, it's just it's just like, it's almost like an arranged marriage when he sends her off with a little bit of a wink to Nigel and off they go. It's like, well, obviously that's going to work out. And then he turns that around and he says, this is great, but yeah, let's face it, she's going to leave in a couple years anyway to do, woman stuff.
Yeah.
Which, is one of those arguments, if argument is the right word to be used for it, that, as people in the workplace, women are less reliable because they're going to go do the baby thing. They're going to want to go take home. And I think it's really fascinating. I stumbled across this just weird bit of trivia, and I wasn't able to double check it. I literally ran across it right before. The actress who's playing Faye had been a fairly regular BBC actress, apparently, for quite some time. And then she quit to go off and have babies and be a housewife for a few years. And she was just returning to work here after that. And it's like, okay, well, and they're almost, I mean, she'd come back to work, but I mean, it is almost that kind of, see? That's what women do. I was like, and it's And when my kids were born, my wife did take, with my daughter, that wasn't so much of a problem because she happened to be born in the summer. My wife's a teacher. So, she was off for a few months anyway. But, after she took a few months off, then I took a few months off to look after them. So as much as I could, or probably just a month, come to think of it, just felt like a few months. Anyway, so a little bit more advanced now, but it really, and I think, we could probably look at Barbara too in the Doomwatch office. She's obviously a caricature of a secretary, replacing the previous caricature of a secretary. But I don't think there's any doubt that she's young and she's single, and when she gets married, that'll be the end of it. She'll leave. I mean, I think that's the expectation that they have for her. Assuming she doesn't
there's no depth there. There has been no depth to that character or Pat's character, because that I don't even understand the purpose of the role within the show. I mean, sure, the office needs someone.
One for the dads.
But does it need to be a speaking part? Yeah. I mean, it is just a show that has failed to give a regular role to a woman.
And that's what this actress is being brought in to do. This character.
Well, I don't want any spoilers about what happens next. But
I don't know. I actually genuinely don't know what happens next, because they left this with kind of like, not sure if she's in or not. But from what I've read, this was an attempt to bring in a female character to kind of balance out the team a little bit.
Well, it certainly seems
you bring her in, and then
there in the next episode.
You bring her in, and then you just lay the sexism over the top of her. And I can't tell whether or not. All right, how about this? Do you think the writer was trying to make a point about the sexism, or do you think the writer was just reflecting the sexism?
I think there may have been a point buried in there somewhere. But I think what actually happens is that whatever kind of small effort is made to satirize some of the sexist attitudes that are present in this episode, it's essentially just completely buried by all of the kind of uncritically reflected sexism that is just really left unquestioned here.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if a tiny part of that, but big. I mean, it's certainly interesting in terms of being a kind of a document of the time. I think it's genuinely written as an honest attempt to try and portray what were common attitudes, and I suspect, comparing it with other things from that sort of time, that it does that relatively honestly and relatively well. But a TV show such as this should do more than just present what is around. It should offer, I think, some sort of commentary on it, or some,
it doesn't.
Take some sort of critical attitude towards it, and it really doesn't in this case.
And I think even worse, it kind of, this whole thing about, and I think they're using it metaphorically, but I'm not absolutely sure, the whole thing about celibacy. You take this job, it's celibacy.
Well, I think, again,
really, I mean, look at Ridge. It's not celibacy.
Well, that is precisely an example of there being another standard.
Yeah,
we've had the point a couple of episodes back about Quist's celibacy, and I think that's probably what it's riffing on. But actually, what's going on here in these discussions is that Quist is essentially trying to put across that everyone who works for Doomwatch is so committed, so dedicated to their work that they don't have time to maintain any personal relationships, and that Chantry should be aware that that is what will happen to her if she comes and works in the office. Now, the implication there is, of course, that's what's happened to Ridge as well, and it may well be the case. But what Ridge does is satisfy his sexual needs in a different way.
But okay, so let's
and the assumption, this is where there is a double standard. The assumption is that Chantry won't just go out and have casual sexual relationships in the way that Ridge does. She will be she will live a kind of
chaste life,
to be in a cloister forever mute. Yes, like Quist.
Okay. So let's hit Ridge for a second. And I think I may have asked this question back in an earlier episode, but sometimes you look at programs from the past and there are portrayals of the sexual revolution, right? That the pill was a great empowering thing for women. It allowed them to go off and start having sex whenever they wanted, just like men could go off and have sex whenever they wanted. And that freed up those social mores and allowed the free love movement, if you will, to be a part of modern civilization. And, okay, there might be something to that argument. But what you see when you look at these artifacts from that time is that it's still enormously sexist when you get characters like Ridge, who is just living up the dream, but it's still portrayed like, now he doesn't have to respect boundaries because women want to have sex just as much as men do. And so therefore it's just a question of, hey, you up for it? Yes, I am. Let's go. Which we actually have seen Ridge do. And we had the episode with the rat scientist where she basically said the same thing back to him. Well, that's, I want to have sex. You want to have sex. Let's go have sex. Boom. We're off. I almost feel like they're trying to portray the sexual revolution there, but it still comes off as so enormously sexist and one-sided to me. And I don't know if that's what they're going after with Ridge or whether they're trying to go after he's like James Bond or whatever it is. But, he's Quist.
I think there is an element of James Bond to it, but I think the issue with Ridge is not that when he meets a sexy rat scientist or whatever, and the sexy rat scientist fancies him, and boom, off they go. It is not the problem. It is the fact that, as you say, it is those different attitudes and the recognition of boundaries, and so the fact that he may behave in a way that we would immediately consider to be harassment is just waved away as, oh, boys will be boys, almost, because that's the attitude. That's just part and parcel of what a young, healthy, sexually active lad like young John Ridge will do. And hey, what can you do?
Yeah, he's Lord Flashheart for his age, I have 5 women on weekdays and 6 on the weekends. Woof! That's kind of what he is.
But without the satire.
Yes. So Quist makes a comment to Ridge at the end. So, at the beginning, he kind of has that the word celibacy pops up really early in that conversation with Chantry when they weren't talking about sex, and that kind of throws me off. It's like, wait, what? And then we get to the end. Quist explains it to Ridge. He's like, well, I was just pointing out to her, really, that, you look around the Doomwatch team and nobody except for Colin is married. And then you look back at that and you go, the Doomwatch team is 4 people. Quist, who is a widower and an obsessive compulsive and blames himself for his wife's death. So, he's just emotionally scarred. This is not the work, right? There's Ridge, who is a serial adulterer and proponent of the free love generation. But then there's Colin. He even calls Colin out. He doesn't get much screen time, but he's married. And then there's Barbara, who, as I mentioned earlier, is probably expected to go off and get married when she quits the job. That would be true with any job of a secretary back in the... So basically, 25% of them are, 50% if you count widower being someone who could find time to do that in his work. This metaphor doesn't stand. He is projecting entirely and only himself on that. Doomwatch is me. Don't have time, and that's how he sees it. And I'm not sure that that's.
But the other people he's hired are probably in that same mold of being ultra dedicated and not in personal ongoing relationships. That, as far as I could see, was definitely the case with Toby Wren. Not sure that we know Jeff Hardcastle very well.
I'm not even sure he's going to be back. I truly don't know whether he's a permanent character or not. You didn't really mention his absence last time in discussing the Islanders. That's true, I did not.
I wondered whether he would be back in this one, and clearly he's not. But he was set up in You Killed Toby Wren as being the new Toby Wren, and at the beginning of Invasion, he's there clomping about with John Ridge as if, he's fully settled in as a member of the team. So I am wondering, after 2 episodes of absence, where the hell he's gone.
That's the problem with these shows where they put the credits at the end. If you got his name up in the Doomwatch credits, then you'd know he was in there. and you'd know he was a permanent character. But because they put him at the end, they can just slip him in. He might be back 5 episodes from now. I genuinely don't know. I genuinely don't know if Chantry will be back, at all.
No, well, I mean, I should be curious to find out. But if we'd had missing episodes, it would be much more understandable to have these kind of discontinuities. But we are now in a run with the second series where we've got 13 episodes, at least 13 episodes straight, where all of them exist. So it is a bit disconcerting to find these changes like this to the main cast.
So the future is spoiler free for the moment.
Well, hurrah for that.
I will say this episode was written by Roger Parks, and Roger Parks has a long career in British TV. He wrote the Prisoner episode, A Change of Mind. That's the one where the number 6 was declared unmutual. He's done 2 episodes of Doomwatch, including, it looks like another one in the future, just based on the dates, Without the Bomb. He did several episodes of The Survivors, Dead Cars, Return of the Saint. He did 3 not good episodes of Blake 7. Just looking at those titles, Headhunter, Children of Aron, and Voice from the Past. Yeah, not crazy about any of those, as I recall. Stopped doing stuff, it looks like in 1990. My guess is that might be. That's not when he died, though, but he is no longer with us. So, there we go. We haven't seen anything else from him in Doomwatch at this point. So. But he seemed to, I thought this was a good one in general with those few reservations. Oh, I do have one other question.
I think it's got a lot to live up to after the first 3 episodes in the season, and I think it holds its own. I wouldn't place it as the best episode in the run, but it's very good.
Okay. This last question is still back to the sexism thing. Did Faye fall too much into the, Nigel's divorced. Okay, then. Because it kind of seemed that way to me. Was that?
I don't know about the writing, but I liked the way I liked her performance in it, because it struck me that it was both believable that she had some kind of attraction to him, and that the vestiges of that lingered on, but also she was quite sort of within the affection that she felt for him. She was also because you had that really interesting scene where he was asking her to become his daughter's doctor so that she would be able to administer the Stelamice, and I think I probably do want to give some credit to the writing. Actually, the way in which her character was portrayed in weighing that up and deciding how much she would be influenced by her kind of personal involvement, I thought that was well done.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that about wraps it up for this, unless you've got anything else.
I don't.
All right. In that case, above your head what the next episode of Doomwatch is.
I believe it is called By the Pricking of My Thumb.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Something wicked this way comes, if I recall that quote correctly. Thank you for joining me, Simon.
My pleasure, as always.
And listeners, I do hope you'll join us all again next time on Fusion Patrol. You've been listening to Fusion Patrol, a listener-supported podcast. Find out how you can be a sponsor and get early access to all episodes and more at patreon.com/Fusion Patrol. Come join the conversation on Facebook or Twitter. All episodes are available at FusionPatrol.com. Our music is Fight the Future by Amberwolf. This has been a Lone Locust production.